To choose not to choose is still to act. Those are the words of French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. Judges at Europe's highest jurisdiction, well, they agree. Their non-binding ruling against Switzerland over its failure to formulate a concrete plan of action on climate change resonating, as scientists confirmed that our planet's coming off its hottest month of March on record.
And this is only the beginning of climate litigation. All over the world, more and more people are taking their government to court, holding them responsible for their actions.
We'll ask about the case, the two others thrown out on technicalities, and that pressing arbitration that governments must make between the urgent and the important. The urgent is saving livelihoods like those of, say, farmers and small homeowners if they have to front the cost of new environmental norms. The important is reducing carbon emissions that are accelerating global warming. In the run-up to European elections that are in exactly 2 months' time, politicians have prioritized pocketbooks, backtracking on previous pledges in what some see as a populist backlash against the EU's Green Deal. So beyond electoral cycles and symbolic rulings, where is the path to consensus and the safeguarding of our children's futures? Today, in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the cost of climate inaction. And with us is climate activist and researcher Claire Lejeune. Thanks for being with us.
That's fine. Hi.
Also with us, Nicolas Mélan, senior advisor at EV Volumes, EV as in electrical vehicles. Nice to see you.
Yes. Good evening, François.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it's the Strasbourg-based European Court of Human Rights throwing out 2 cases, but setting a precedent with the third. Charlotte Hughes explains.
They call themselves the Senior Women for Climate Protection. After losing their case in their home country, these Swiss women have finally secured a landmark win. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled against the Swiss government, which the women had accused of not doing enough to combat global warming.
The Swiss government has done too little on climate change. We have health and quality of life consequences for elderly people, and women are particularly vulnerable.
The court president said that by failing to establish sufficient policies to combat climate change, Switzerland had breached the human right to a private and family life. MEP Damien Carême had been seeking a similar verdict. Previously the mayor of a coastal French town, Carême had argued that France's government had not taken adequate measures to prevent climate change, and said that as a result, his town is threatened by rising sea levels. But his case was thrown out. According to the court, Carême was not a victim in the case as he was living in Brussels when he filed his initial complaint. A case brought by 6 young people from Portugal was also dismissed. Hailing from areas of the country that were ravaged by wildfires in 2017, the group took 32 European countries to court.
Nothing will change the fact that European governments need to do so much more to ensure we have a livable future.
However, they were unsuccessful, as the court said they had not exhausted all legal options back home. The group welcomed the verdict on Switzerland, describing it as a win for everyone. A sentiment echoed by Greta Thunberg, who said the court's decision is only the beginning of climate litigation.
Claire Lejeune, your reaction?
Yes, what's interesting in this case is that it's the first time that an international court, so this time the European Court of Human Rights, actually sets a precedent on climate change issues. Because basically, for this case with the Swiss elderly women, they use Article 8, which is on the right to private life, which includes an obligation for states to secure a healthy environment. So basically, you have an interesting case where climate change is starting to have such immense effects, such concrete effects on livelihoods, on health, that it can become a basis for things like this Article 8 to be the basis of rulings that place states in front of their responsibility to act in face of not only environmental degradations, but climate change as a whole.
And we've seen these cases also brought up before French courts. Is this just kind of debating society sort of chatter, since these are non-binding resolutions?
Well, I think if you consider that the laws that we have created together set basically the map of responsibilities, of duties, then climate litigation is a huge, important piece of how we're going to move our societies from a situation where we have this very, this non-ecological functioning to a system where the rights and responsibilities are adequately equipped to deal with the climate crisis. So I think it's not just chatter. It's something very important symbolically. And now the whole question is, well, are these rulings enough to make states actually take sufficient action? What do we actually mean by sufficient action? And can it happen without other pieces of the puzzle, which could be political pressure, which could be finding the political institutions and the political economy that is able to resolve this antagonism between what you were describing as the important and the urgent, basically, well, end of the month issues and end of the world issues, which we have in France known very well, especially with our history, with the yellow vests, etc. So these rulings come in a situation where we have not yet found this pathway that allows us to kind of bind these two elements together.
And again, Nicolas Mélan, the court ruling that these are elderly women from Switzerland. Their argument was because they're elderly, they're more susceptible to heat waves and to more vulnerable as a result of that. And that the court agreeing that this violated their human rights, the fact that their country had not formulated a plan of action.
As Claire said, it's the first time that we have a ruling on the human rights related to climate change. So I think we should consider it as a positive point. But there is a negative point, which is that since we are looking at climate change and doing this COP every year since 28 years ago, there is a big loophole. Because basically we started to do this conference of parties when China joined the World Trade Organization. And 2023, the CO2 emission were never that high, the coal consumption were never that high, and it's not Switzerland which is going to change the world. But there is a pathway and there is a solution, which is to target, we published this recently, is to look at people who use a lot of coal, because that's basically our consumption. They are producing coal in China and India, but to do what? To do battery for electric cars, to do Tesla sold in France.
China's the world's factory, so they're also making the goods that we demand of them.
And in France, for your information, if you look at carbon footprint, more than half of the carbon footprint is from our imports. Are we tackling that? Not at all. So what we propose is to look at those countries who use a lot of coal. There are 14 countries in the world for electricity, and to use their export, to put a tax on their export to finance their transition out of coal. So we'll put a tax of, let's say, 15% on Chinese export, and we'll make the money available for China to get rid of coal. And that's probably the only pathway if we seriously want to reduce CO2 emissions.
China will argue that, yes, we are building coal factories, but we're also accelerating our renewables far faster than they are in Europe.
Yeah, sure, but it's not enough.
I think what's difficult with climate change and environmental issues is that the scales are simultaneously very global and very local. And so I think what we're trying to achieve with climate litigation is to try to kind of harness some forms of localized responsibilities that we can then set in action to try and get some action on. If you take the very recent history of these climate litigation cases, you've got India's Supreme Court, who has ruled to extend the right to life to climate change, to basically the effects of climate change. You have also a ruling in Montana last year, I think, that actually linked the right to a clean environment to the further development of fossil fuel plants. So here you have very clearly the link between fossil fuels and the right to a clean environment. And you have also a Dutch case that forces the government to rapidly decrease their emissions. So all of these together, they kind of create a situation where it's not going to be possible anymore for states to say, right, we're only 1% of the emissions, so please go and see China or India, etc. This is important to say, that China is a huge chunk of the responsibility. But I think that historically, especially Western countries, have this symbolic and more important responsibility to get in action. And these forms of climate litigations are a way for also climate activists. I mean, these movements were very much supported by people like Greta Thunberg, etc.
Again, so, we're 2 months out from those European elections.
Yeah.
5 years ago, 2019 elections, the Greens did very well, and there was the Green New Deal, which was a response to that by the European Commission and the European Parliament. Now, you look at the polling numbers, there seems to be a backlash. Why is that?
I would explain it by the insufficient force of the just transition paradigm within the Green New Deal. So basically, the fact that, yes, we have advanced these investment packages, furthering green industrial policies, but we haven't really created a situation where the social securities that should accompany this transition have been implemented. And this is because the social contract basically happens at a state level, not at a European level. So we've had all these transformative measures at a European level, but we haven't had the ways to bridge this gap that you were talking about between basically end of a month and end of a year. So I think the problem with the Green New Deal was the fact that the equity dimension of it comes as kind of an afterthought. There's the Just Transition scheme, a fund, but the levels of the funds available are not at all sufficient to kind of make the transition into something that can be supported very broadly and where we can politically control the potentially regressive dimensions of these policies.
You agree with that, Nicolas Mélan, that to take on these issues on a global scale, like you were mentioning earlier with India and China, to have this conversation, European countries all have to be singing from the same hymn sheet?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of numbers. There's an economist, Nicholas Stern, who said that we'd have to transfer $2,500 billion per year to poor countries. The COP in Paris said we should do 100. What is done today is 10. The solution I gave you, where we would tax imports, it's going to provide $1,250 billion per year. So that's the only solution to raise this money. And you were asking why are the Green lower than 5 years ago? I think the reason is pretty simple. People realize that they've done a lot of efforts, a lot of norms impacting their life, impacting farmers, and there is no result because the CO2 emission keeps on increasing.
But it keeps increasing because the world's population is increasing.
Because we miss the big part. And as long as we just say, yeah, let's focus on Europe and just trust China and India. India, like a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister said, guys, we reached a fantastic landmark. 1 billion tons of coal we produced in India. So, you know, there's difference between talk and action. And we need to go on those countries. It's not only China, India, in those 14 countries. You have the USA, you have Germany, you have Poland, you have South Korea, Japan, all those big countries. We live in a world which is made of coal. That's it. We need to move away from this. We need to localize. France, as a country, has one of the lowest carbon emission electricity. It should be the plant of the world. And that's one of the countries with the UK which has most desindustrialized the country. It doesn't work like this.
All right, France, carbon footprint is lower than many. It's in fact down. When it comes to electricity, it's down by 4.8%. Into 2023, according to national statistics. But of course, a lot of that is because there were nuclear reactors that had been stalled and are now up and running again. So again, it's this question of, is it coal or nuclear the option?
No, it shouldn't be. I think when we debate which kind of energy mix we want to go towards, we often miss the core subject of what we call sobriété. So basically having a decrease in our needs to start with, so that the pressure on increasing solar power, wind power and nuclear power is lesser than it is currently. So first priority is, of course, get out of fossil fuel dependency. And then there has to be this open debate about which types of energy we want to prioritize and harness to implement our transition. And this debate is not currently happening because we're not having the debate on actually the level of demand of energy. And that's what has to decrease. And this implies a change, a quite radical change in our ways of life.
And does that come through the courts? Does that come through, is that voluntary? How do you have this sobriety? How do you enforce it?
I think as all moments where society is transformed in quite significant ways, it has to come from a variety of places in society. And there was this very strong
but is it carrot or stick?
It has to be, I think there has to be some level of sticks and firm regulation in this process. It's an economist called Daniela Gabor who analyzes also the Inflation Reduction Act and the Green New Deal, saying that the problem is that it's a lot of carrots but not enough sticks in this process, because basically the funds that basically governments and public authorities are providing are just used to de-risk the decarbonisation and the transition process without this kind of public authority to reshape the economy. And that's what we should be thinking about, is how we actually reshape the infrastructures of our economy, the way our transportation system works, the way our food system works, so that we have simultaneously this reshaping of our energy mix, but also a reshaping of our needs and a decrease in our needs in energy. What's missing is the democratic debate on what all this is going to look like, basically. And in France, we had a quite exemplary moment where we had this debate within the Convention Citoyenne pour le Climat, which was a...
Yeah, we had these town hall-style meetings that took place. And,
and also the national...
And they talked about it, but at the end of the day...
it wasn't implemented fully. So now we have the planification écologique with SGPE, who is building plans to transition our economy out of fossil fuel dependency. But if we are serious in saying that it's a societal change, it's not just a technological, then we're going to have to get everyone on board.
We're going to have to get everyone on board, but we're coming up to those elections. So we've seen rollbacks on things like norms for farming, rollbacks on biodiversity norms at the European level. Again, everybody's for the stick until election time comes around. Nicolas Ménon.
Yeah, I agree that we, just to come back on the last year, CO2 emission decreased by almost 5%, but that was actually a lot of sobriété at the time. Why? Because first, the weather was warmer, so people used less heating. Of course, they also reduced the heating in their place from a couple of people, lower to 19 degrees, but also it was too expensive. It was also a lot because of the increase in the price of electricity, increase in the price of gas, that people used less energy. That also industrial
plants... It's Barack Obama's old line that the only way you'll get people to consume less gas is if it's $4 a gallon.
I'm not sure it's a right way, because that means delocalizing our plants, what is left to China. That's what we've done a lot, for the last 25 years. It worked very well to reduce our CO2 emission. The biggest decline in CO2 emission in the industry sectors, 50%. You close the plant, no more emissions. But for people who could eat only at 15, 16 degrees, be able to eat at 13, 14, I don't think it's a nice sobriété, and it's more something that will foster and get what we're going to see in the elections, because basically it's not something that they decided that couldn't pay electricity anymore.
So much more to talk about on this topic and over the next 2 months and beyond. I want to thank you, Nicolas Mélan. I want to thank Claire Lejeune. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.